Beseder. Fine. So we are today's Daf Ayin Beis, right? So we're starting on Ayin Aleph and Beis on the bottom.
Right.
Now Omar Ula says Lamanda Omar Asham Vada L'Bayi Yediyah B'Tchila. According to Manda Omar, who holds that by an Asham Vada you don't need a Yediyah. So apparently there are opinions that that hold. And even though by a chatas, obviously you can only bring a korban once you have the idea, once you know that you actually sinned, that's when you're chayiv to bring. That's when you're chayiv to bring the chatas, right? And you can't bring a chatas before that, all right? If you're not sure whether you did the aver or not, so then you bring an asham toli, right? You don't bring the chatas. If you brought a chatas on the suffix, it doesn't work. You have to have the idea in order for the chatas to be brought. However, by an asham vadai, which is there are like 5 asham vadais, asham shifra charufa, asham Itzaira, Asham Nazir, there's a bunch of Ashams, right? So there's a Manda Omer who holds that Asham Vada Lo Yediyah B'Tchila, because the question over there is talking about Asham Me'ilais. Rashi quotes the whole sugi in Krisos, and he says that there's a sheet over there that if you're not sure whether or not you were mile in something, so what you're allowed to do is you can, instead of bringing an Asham Toli now, and then when you find out, you bring an Asham Vadai. Right, so because the Asham Toli and Asham Vada really have the same exact animal, it's the same carbon essentially. So therefore, the Rabbi Tarfon agree and tells you, don't worry, you don't have to bring an Asham Toli now and then wait. If you find out you did that very, bring an Asham Vada again. You might as well just make it tonight on this one carbon and say, if I'm never going to know, so let it be an Asham Toli, and if I know, so let it be an Asham Vada, and here's my Me'ilah, and my Me'ilah should be a Nedava, or I'll pay my Me'ilah later. Right, so Rabbi Akiva seems to argue and says, no, don't do that. So, I think that's the way it goes. So either way, there's a sheet over there that holds that in terms of an Asham Vadai, you can bring it al Tanai, which means even though you never really knew that you for sure did the Avera, at the end of the day, if you find out later on that yes, you did the Avera, L'mafreya, the Asham that you brought becomes an Asham Vadai, which means that it works at the point before you had the Yediyah B'chlal. Tosis argues on Rashi, says that machlekes is really irrelevant. Everybody really agrees. It's just a question of whether it's worth it at that point. But Tosis bring another mandomer. Either way, there is a mandomer who holds that Asham Vadai does not need a yediyah, and there's a mandomer who holds you do need a yediyah, right? But so Ula is saying, according to mandomer holds that you do not need a yediyah, which means that even though you didn't know, it still works. Now that means that's a big yisod. The pshat is that usually, when you have the idea is mechayev you to bring the carbon. Right now, if you're telling me that Asham Vadai, you don't need the idea to mechayev you a carbon. That means the idea itself doesn't function either as being mechayev you a carbon. The idea is sort of irrelevant in terms of Asham. Right, that's what comes out. According to the Manda Omar, if like baya idea, that means the idea doesn't function like it works by chatas either. Right, so Oibazah, he says Ula, if you're talking about a shifcha charufa. Shivcha Charufa is one of the type of chatos. Right? A Shivcha Charufa is a woman who's married to a Chatzi Eved, Chatzi Ben Chayrin. She's a quasi Ishes Ish. So the Torah says it's different dinim than a regular Ishes Ish. So there's a specific Asham Shivcha Charufa. Now, what's unique about a Shivcha Charufa is that if they have relations b'mezid, right? If they're over b'mezid, you still bring a carbon, and not only that, if you're over b'mezid a bunch of times, right, you bring only one carbon. So because it's one of these interesting karbanos, and that's the Mishnah increases, which says 5. There's only 5 different averas that you bring one carbon on many averas, right? And one of them is shifcha charufa. So even though he did it, they were boiled 5 times, b'mezid, you get only essentially one einish, the einish of the carbon, right? But besides to the malchus, we're not going to talk about the malchus, but we're talking about in terms of the carbon, the one carbon takes care of all 5 averas. Now, because that's true, so the same thing would apply by shogeg, because shogeg is not going to be worse than mezid, right? So if you have somebody who b'shogeg, they have 5 different be'ilos with not behelamecha. Behelamecha, that avada, always you wouldn't be chayev more than one, right? Over here it's talking about even if it's in different halomos, right? But because by Mazid, when you do it on purpose, you still have only one carbon. So for sure, by Shaygig also, where you're less of a culprit, right? For sure, we're not going to be Mechayiv more than one carbon, right? Because by Shaygig, because again, by Mazid, you can bring one carbon on many Averis, so too by Shaygig. Right? However, if you hold that you need a Yediyah for an Asham Vadai, right, then you would hold that a Yediyah does work just like a regular Yediyah by a carbon Chatas. And therefore, you would say, according to Rabbi Yochanan at least, right, the Yediyah is Mechalek Lekapara. Which means that we know, we discussed yesterday that a Yediyah really could have two functions. It could function in terms of just being Mechalek the Averis and say that it's not Behel Mechad, now you're Chayiv again. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, and this is Machlokes when you're Yochanan Shlakish, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, it acts more than just a Yediyah, as just a Yediyah Lechalek. It's actually, Chiluki Yediyah is Chiluki Kapara, which means the Yediyah actually is Mechayiv you a Kapara, right? So according to Rabbi Yochanan, really we should say that even though by Hashem Vadai, the Yediyah itself isn't enough, right, to be Mechayiv you another carbon, because just because you had different Averis, doesn't make a difference. One carbon can take care of many Averis, just like it takes care of a Mazid. Right? So the Yediyah, out to the Yediyah and Lechalek is not enough to be Mechayiv you another carbon. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that a Yediyah is more than just a Mechalek, a Yediyah is actually like a Kapara, right? Chiluki Yediyah, so like Chiluki Kaparas. So then a Bazai, even by a Shaygeg, you should have to bring more than one carbon. Right? A Mazid, we understand you bring only one carbon, but a Shaygeg, right, because you had the Yediyah in between, it's like you had the Kapara, and now it's a new case. Right, now each Be'il is a new case. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, really the Yediyah should be worse, and even by a Shifcha Charufa it should be different. Except Ula pointing out, but look, according to the Manda Omar that holds that by Asham Vada Yediyah doesn't play a role at all. So therefore, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not going to make a difference. Once again, because his whole point is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds Yediyah is much more. So by a Shifcha Charufa, right, even though you're b'shaygig, you should be chayav many, because the idea is not just mechalik it in terms of it becoming many averas, it's even mechalik in terms of kaparas. And therefore, you should really, yes, be chayav for each one, even though by mezid you're not chayav for each one. Comes Ula and says, yes, but Amanda Omar, that the Yasham Vada, the idea doesn't play a role, so therefore, Rabbi Yochanan would agree also here, in terms of the idea being mechalik lekapara, it's not going to be mechalik lekapara, because the idea doesn't play a role by Yasham Vada, and hare, you could even bring an Yasham Vada without a idea b'chlal. Right, so that's Ula's point. So that's what it is. Now, and now I sort of went ahead because the Gemara is gonna clarify what Ula means, going forward. But so Maskiv or Rav Hamnuna asks Elamayat bal v'chazar bal. Let's say the guy was boil and then chazar a boil. The hifresh carbon, then he was mafresh a carbon. The Omar and he said Hamtinu liat she'evoil. Wait for me. Rav Hamnuna sort of pointing out, like, how could it be? The guy's aver after aver after aver. Maybe, he's mafresh carbon, he's in the base of Mikdash, they're ready to bring the carbon, and you let him do it again, right? Now, obviously, you see here that if you have a shoygig plus a mazid, right? If you have a shifcha charufa avero b'shoygig, and then you do a b'mazid, you can also still bring one carbon, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be l'chal kasha, right? But is he saying, do you really think we're not going to mechayiv him again, right? How could it be? So, are you telling me that you're still going to be chayiv only one? A maisa avera that happens after the afrasha. So Ula is saying that everybody's maskim, right? That after the afrasha, then it becomes a new case, right? And a new case in the sense that if you do an avera, if you do the maisa after the afrasha, right? So then,
of course, you'll have to bring another one.
You'll have to bring another one, exactly. And this is worse than what we said yesterday in terms of Rish Lakish, who might hold, right, that after Afrasha, that even after Afrasha, right? We said there's a tzad to say that Rish Lakish might hold that even after Afrasha, it's not a problem, right? It's still not mechalik, but that's only in terms of the idea. But if you do a maisa after the Afrasha, if you do a new maisa avera after the Afrasha, then even Rish Lakish would agree, right, that it's not considered that's considered a new case and you would be chayiv. right? So therefore, Ula is saying all I meant is before Afrasha. Before Afrasha, then we say you chayav only one. But after Afrasha, it's a new case. Now, right? You open up a new file. Now, Kiyasar of Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, he said, Amar Lemanda Amar Hashem Vadei Bai. He said the inverse. Lemanda Amar Hashem Vadei Bai Yediyah B'tchila. According to the Mandar holds, no, you do need Yediyah B'tchila. So then, Baal Chamesh Beilas B'Shifra Charuv Chayav Kalachas Ve'achas. Then you would be chayav on each one. It's even though by Mezid you would only be chayav one carbon, but over here by Shaygeg, right? You would be chayav for each one. Why? Because he's going, right? So asks Abaye, what do you mean? Chatas, the Bayin Yidiyah B'tchila. Chatas, you always need Yidiyah B'tchila. Pligi Rabbi Yechon Rishon Meshlakish. There's a machlekes. And why are you saying, right, why are you saying that it's so pashut that a Yidiyah is Chilukei Yidiyah, is Chilukei Kaparis, right? We're assuming over here, the situation over here is that obviously he had a Yidiyah in between each one, right? Baal Chamesh Bilas B'Shifra Charufa, it's Chai for each one because he had a Yidiyah in between. If you didn't have a Yidiyah between each one, so it's anyway Behelam Echad, anyway, you've shown only Chai of one, right? So over here, we're talking about he had a Yidiyah in between, right? And you're telling me that that the reason why it's worse than a Mezid is because a Chilukei Yidiyah is like a Chilukei Kaparis, right? Again, just because you had a separate Avera, that's not enough because by Mezid, even though it's a separate Avera, you still have only one carbon, right? So we need to have something more. So you're telling me that the Yidiyah is even more than that. You're telling me the Yidiyah is like a Chilukei Kaparis, and therefore it opens a new file every single time. And now I'm chayav a carbon on each Avera, even worse than if I would be a Mezid, right? Because the Yidiyah is worse. The Yidiyah that I did the Avera is like a Kapara. I guess the Yidiyah only applies if you're a Shaygig. If you're a Mezid, that's not called a Yidiyah because you always knew, right? It's not like you didn't know and then you knew. Yidiyah means you forgot and then you remembered, right? So Amalei Abaye, right? So Chatas to be in Yidiyah B'tchila. What do you mean by Chatas? That everyone agrees that Yidiyah, right? You need a Yidiyah. Upligi Rabbi Yechon Rishon Ben Lakish, and there's still a machlekes, right? That it's not so pasha that Chilukei Yidiyah is Chilukei Kapara. Rish Lakish holds that even though you had a Yidiyah, two separate Yidiyahs, it could still be mitzaref as it's all one carbon. So the Ishtiki was quiet. Amalei, he said, Dilma b'mais lachar afrasha kamart. Maybe you mean lachar afrasha. Maybe weiter you mean that that we're talking about a case where he did the Avera after Afrasha, meaning the second Be'ilah was, and the third Be'ilah again was after every time you were Mafresh, right? Just like Rabbi just said, that Mais Lachar Afrasha, even Rish Lakish would agree that already closes the previous case, and now you would have to bring a carbon on the next one. So he said yes. Now the Gemara is just going to summarize the whole thing. Ki Asa Ravin, Amar, he said, Hakal Maidim Mishifcha Charufa. Everybody agrees by Shifcha Charufa. The Hakal Moedim B'Shifcha Charufa, Umachlekes B'Shifcha Charufa. So he said three things. Hakal Moedim twice and then a Machlekes. What does he mean? Hakal Moedim B'Shifcha Charufa De'ena Chayav L'Achas. That's Kide'ula. Right? That's meaning Hakal Moedim means that Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish both agree, right, that according to Manda Omar, that Ula discussed, that Hashem Vadei Loi Ba Yediyah, right, so that everyone agrees, both Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish agree that you only chayav one because Yidiyah doesn't play a function, doesn't play a role in Hashem Vadei. Everyone agrees that if it's after Afrasha that you do the Avera, then everybody agrees you're chayav again, even Rish Lakish. What about, and when is there a machlekes? So that's Lemanda Omar Hashem Vadei by Yidiyah B'tchila. According to Manda Omar, that by Hashem Vadei Yidiyah does function just like a chatos. So then you have the same machlekes between Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish if it's before Afrasha, right? If it's before Afrasha and you have the different Yidiyah, so according to Rabbi Yechon, that's enough to be mechalak. It's chiluki just like a chatos, just like our case by chatos, right? From yesterday. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says no. In that situation, yes, the Yidiyah function to be mechalak to different averas, but by Shivcha Charufa, we don't care that it's another avera. All we need a chiluki kapara, and a chiluki Yidiyah according to is not a chiluki kapara. Okay, so this is weiter just an application of the machlokes of Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish, right? You would, in terms of yesterday, you would think, oh, it only applies in the situation where you were mechalik your yidiyas because you remembered, and then you were mafresh, and then you had another yidiyah. Over here, the Gemara is applying it in a simpler case, in a simpler oifen by Shifcha Charufa. He did it 5 times, and he had a regular yidiyah in between, and it still applies here because Shifcha Charufa, in its nature, you can bring one carbon on many averas. Okay, so that's that. Now it's a new sugya. Itmar. niskaven lagbia satolosh v'chotach hasamechuber. If someone was mechaven to pick something up from the ground, lagbia satolosh. So Rashi says, your mom should be mechaven to pick up a knife that's on the ground, and on the way, right, you picked up v'chotach hasamechuber. On the way, your hand or the knife, happened to be toilish something, happened to cut something up from the ground. You're putter, right? Because you were mechaven.
That's less than shogeg. That's like misase.
Right. That's what Rashi says. Right. Pratla misasek. It's even less than a davar sheni miskaven. It's even right. Right. It's even less than a shoygeg. A shoygeg. Right. Until now, we're thinking that a shoygeg is either if you forgot about Shabbos or you forgot that it's usher on Shabbos. Right. But anything else is not a shoygeg. Anything less than that is not a shoygeg. So you were mechaven to do it b'chalal, so you're not going to be chayev, and you're potter. However, the next case of lachtach esatolosh v'chatach hasamechuber, if you meant to cut something that was already detached, v'chatach hasamechuber, but you by mistake cut the other one that's mechuber, right? So Rav Amar Potter. Rav says you're still potter, and Abaye Amar chayev. Rav Amar Potter, why the hell is niskaven l'chaticha d'isur? You weren't mechaven to cut this one. Abaye Amar chayev daka mechaven l'chaticha be'alma. You were mechaven for the ma'isa chaticha, and therefore, even though it was a mistake that you cut the wrong one, the ma'isa you were mechaven for this action. It's not called misasek. You were mechaven for this action, and therefore you're going to be chayev. Rava says no. The ma'isa you were mechaven for this. So Rava is saying that I wasn't mechaven b'chlal to have. It wasn't nicest machshavti, right? My machshava wasn't accomplished, right? So now there's a shayla over here in the Rishonim what exactly this case is talking about. During miskaven lachtoch esatolosh v'chotach hasamechuber, right? Are we talking about? It sounds like you're talking about two separate plants, right? One right next to the other, right? And you meant to cut the one on the right, and you cut the one on the left. The one on the right was tolush, and the one on the left was mechuber, right? And the diuk would be is that if they were both mechuber, then they do agree you're chayev, right? If they're both mechuber, even though I cut the wrong one, right, I'm still chayev because at the end of the day, nice is machshavte. It doesn't make it. The fact that it's a different apple doesn't make a difference, right? If I meant to cut this apple and I end up cutting the next apple, right, so I'm chayev, right? The Rambam takapaskins this way because you got what you wanted, even though it happened to be the wrong one. The Rambam says that if you're mechaven to cut an apple and then and then by mistake you cut a peach, then you're not chayev. Right? Even though you were talking mechaven la'aveira, but because le'naisis machshavtoi, because you got a peach instead of an apple, so then you would be potter. The Rambam says, right? But Taisus wants to hold here. This Taisus holds that even if you're mechaven for this apple, and you took that apple, you're also potter because lemaisa you didn't get this. You didn't get what you wanted, right? So therefore, Taisus says that this Gemara is not talking about when you were mechaven to cut the one on the right, you cut the one on the left. You thought that this one was talish already. You meant to cut this apple. Or whatever, you meant to cut this stem, right? And you thought that this stem was takatolosh, and it ended up being mechuber. And only in that case is there a machlokes, that according to Rava, he says you're potter because l'maisa you weren't mechaven to do that avera. According to Abaye, he says, you're mechaven for the chaticha, you're mechaven for this chaticha, right? It just happens to be, it was mechuber, right? And you didn't know it was mechuber. Abaye calls I'm sorry, you're chayiv, and that's also a shoygig according to Abaye, right? So according to Abaye, you have three cases of shoygig. Right, this is according to everybody. Abaye has another case of shoygig. It's not just a shoygig that you forgot about Shabbos. It's not just a shoygig you forgot that it's usher. It's also a shoygig if you sort of had a mistake in what's going on in the Mitzias. Okay, so Amarav, where do I know this from? The Tanya. Chomer Shabbos mishar mitzvahs. Shabbos is more chomer than other mitzvahs. V'chomer shar mitzvahs mishabbos, and other mitzvahs have a chomer even more than Shabbos. Chomer Shabbos mishar mitzvahs. Shabbos, that by Shabbos, also shtayim mehelam echad chayav al kol achas ve'achas. That, but by Shabbos, if you do two averis with one helem, you're chayav for each one, maybe two different melachas. Mashenki mishar mitzvahs, by shar mitzvahs is not true, and the Gemara is going to explain what this means. V'chomer shar mitzvahs b'Shabbos, and other mitzvahs are more chomer than Shabbos. B'shar mitzvahs shogeg b'lei miskaven chayav. If you did something by mistake, so now we're going to explain what this means, and this is where Rava is taking his opinion from, that if you're shogag shaloi b'miskaven on Shabbos, you're pater, right? So Amar Mar, and Abaye obviously is going to interpret it in his own way. So Amar Mar, chomer Shabbos mishar mitzvahs. Shabbos is more chomer than the other mitzvahs. Shabbos also shtayim mehelam echad chayav al kol achas ve'achas. Masheikim mishar mitzvahs. Hechi davi, says the Gemara. Ilei medav k'tzir u'tchina. if you did a ktsira and a tchina, and that's why you're chai, you do two different malachas, and therefore you're chai for each one. The kavasa gabishar mitzvahs. What do you mean? That's the same thing as other mitzvahs. If ochal chayla v'dam, so Shabbos isn't more chamer. It's the same thing. Ktsira and tchina are different malachas, two different averos, just like chayla v'dam. Hachatarti mechayev, hachatarti mechayev. Ela shar mitzvahs to mechayev, ela chada echidami. What's the case that you're only chayev one? The ochal chayla v'chaylev. You're chayev only. If you eat chaylev and chaylev in one helam, you chayiv only one. Says the Gemara, well, the kavasa gabe Shabbos, the ktsir, you do two ktsiris, you also chayiv only one. Hacha chada v'chayiv, hacha chada v'chayiv. Says the Gemara, la'olam, we're talking about a case, the avad ktsira utchina. Avada, in the case in Shabbos is when you do ktsir and tchina, you chayiv twice. Umay mashenkim mishar mitzvahs. So why is that more chamer than other mitzvahs? Avodah zarah. It's not talking about other mitzvahs in general. It's talking about specifically the other mitzvah of avodah zarah. Rabbi Ami, that specifically by avodah zarah, the Gemara darshans out that if you were zibech, which means you slaughtered v'kiter and you put incense v'nisach and you poured stuff for the avodah zarah, b'halam achas ein chayav achas. And even though they're essentially three different avodas, right? By avodah zarah, there's a specific. By avodah zarah, there's a specific. There's a unique din that you chayav only one. Now, says the Gemara, right? So that's what's more chamer. It's more chamer on Shabbos because each oifen you're chayav for each ktsira and tchina. Mashen avodah zarah is not true. Says the Gemara, b'mayu kimted b'avodah zarah. Okay, now that you're telling me that the shar mitzvahs we're talking about in this price is avodah zarah, ema seifa, it says in the sefer chamer b'shar mitzvahs b'shar mitzvahs, right? That shar mitzvahs are more chamer than have an element that they're more chamer than Shabbos. What? That shogag b'lo yiskaven is chayav. That even though you were shogag b'lo yiskaven, you're chayav. Mashen came b'Shabbos. But it's not true in Shabbos, because by Shabbos, misasik, right? Says the Gemara, what's the case that by avodah zarah you're chayev even though you're shogag b'lo miskaven? Hay shogag b'lo miskaven david zohechitam ilay makasav beis hakneses who you thought it was a regular shul and you bow down to the avodah zarah to the church or whatever, right? So l'maisa you bow down to an avodah zarah, but in your mind you thought it was a shul. Right, so harei libel hashamayim, you weren't avin aver b'chlal. You meant to, you were never avin avodah zarah. So because in your mind you were always being mechavan to Hashem, so you're not chayiv. You didn't over avodah zarah. The ella the chazian darta v'sagila. Ella my the pshat is you saw it wasn't a church. It wasn't an avodah zarah mamish. What it was is a statue of a king, something you make for the honor of the king, and you bow down to it, and you didn't bow down the shem elokos. You didn't bow down the shem elokos. Says the Gemara, right, and that's the case where you were shogag b'lo miskaven, and then you would still be chayev. Says the Gemara, if he actually was mekabel as an avodah zarah, the statue is amazing too. And if he wasn't mekabel it as an avodah zarah, lav klumut, then it doesn't mean anything. Right? Shogag shlo miskaven. I guess the havmina is that you bow down to the savera b'shogeg. And you sort of didn't really have in mind for it to be an aliyah. So the Gemara says, well, if you're makabel, then you're takachayv. If you're not makabel, then it's nothing. Ela miyav v'yira. Gemara says, Ela, we're talking about you bowed down to an avodah zarah, or an actual avodah zarah. But why did you bow down to it? Not because you wanted to bow down to an avodah zarah, but because you did it because of your love for somebody or your fear from somebody. Right, so it's not. You were mechaven. It's not like bowing down to a church and you thought it was a shul, right? Because you mamish didn't know it was avodah zarah. No, but here you talk about being mechaven to be avodah to bow down to an actual avodah zarah. You're aware that it's an avodah zarah. However, lemaisa, it is. You're not doing it because you really want to be avodah zarah. You're doing it because it's because you fear somebody or you love somebody, right? So it says the Gemara, Hanicha le'abaye. The Omar chayav. According to Abaye, says you're chayav in this situation. You talk a chayav, even though we're sort of calling you a shogeg shelo miskaven because you didn't really mean to be makabel avodah zarah as a lahus, right? But you were mechaven. Right, you did intend to bow down to this avodah zarah, but because you did it for another reason, because you're afraid of somebody, you love somebody else, right? And that's why you did it, right? So, according to Hanichal Abaye Damar Chayev, it says still in that situation you're chayev. El Rav Damar Pater, it says indeed in that situation because you're not doing it for avodah zarah, you're doing it just for your friend or whatever. So then you talk a potter. So ma'ikal and meimar. So what's his pshat in this, right? So ela b'aymer mutter. Says the Gemara, it's going to be b'aymer mutter. The case over here is that you're being aymer mutter. You think that it's totally mutter, and therefore, since you think it's totally mutter, like Rashi says, like if you're ger, then it's guy ben anochim. So then you thought avodah zarah is not also, but you didn't know avodah zarah is also b'chlal. So then it's shlegig shlebim miskaven. You're not going to be chayiv for that type of avodah zarah because Rava holds you are going to be chayiv for that type of avodah zarah. Masha'en came b'Shabbos, but by Shabbos you're not going to be chayiv the potter legamrei. Says the Gemara, why is that true? Masha'en came b'Shabbos the potter legamrei. Al kochach le'ba minei Rava, right? Mirab Nachman Rava only asked Rab Nachman ela ili chiyuv echad il chiyuv tarti. Whether you're chayiv if you don't know that it's Shabbos and you don't know that anything on Shabbos is usher, right? So we had the shaila of whether or not we go basa the shigigas Shabbos or we go basa the shigigas melachos, right? But the whole shaila was, right, is if you're chayiv one, if you're chayiv for many, because which halama do we refer to? Aval miftri lagamrei, but to say that you're putter in total, right? That the Gemara is not going to. That Rava never contemplated, right? So why would he say over here by Omer Mutter, which is by Shabbos, Omer Mutter means a guy didn't know that it was Shabbos and didn't know that on Shabbos anything is Mutter. That's what Omer Mutter is equated to in terms of Ochos Shabbos. And according to that, if the Avodah Zarah aspect of the Bryce is talking about Omer Mutter and you're Chayav, so why by Shabbos would you be Putter in total? Aval Miftri L'Gamri Loi. Elo, the Gemara says, Elalav Reisha Be'akom V'Seifa B'Shar Mitzvahs. Must be, the pshat is the Reisha, the only way we're able to interpret it is in terms of Avodah Zarah, right? Because we needed a case of Zibeach V'Kiter that you're going to be Chayiv only one for many, but V'Seifas B'Shar Mitzvahs, and the Seifas Taka discussing regular mitzvahs, not talking about Avodah Zarah. V'Shagar Golem Yiskav B'Shar Mitzvahs Echidami, so by Shabbos, you're Pater because you're Misasik, but by Shar Mitzvahs it's more Chomer, and you're Chayiv by Shagar Shalom Yiskav. So it's Gemara Echidami. You thought it was Shuman and you ate it. Masha'enkin is Shabbos. Masha'enkin on Shabbos, the potter, you're going to be potter on Shabbos because by the Niskav Nachdach Satosh Chatzim Mechuber potter. Right? That according to Rav, you're going to be potter because you're Misasik. Masha'enkin b'Shabbos, Masha'enkin b'Shar Yisurim, if you think that this is Shuman, right, and really happens to be Chaylev, you're going to be Chayev anyway. Why? Because even though you're Misasik, misasik b'chalovim ve'arayis you're chayiv shekei nehene, right? The issue, the isra achila of chalovim and the isra of arayis is all for the hana over here. And if at the end of the day you did have hana, so you're going to be chayiv even though you're misasik. Mashenkin on Shabbos, the isra is the melacha, and if you didn't intend for the melacha, right? So then it doesn't really count. Abaye says the Gemara, how does he interpret the brisa? Doesn't he hold that type of misasik is chayev? Gemara says no. When does he hold you potter on Shabbos? The savar roiku ubalais. By other mitzvahs, if you thought that it was spit and you swallowed it, right, then you're chayev. Mashenkin b'Shabbos, the potter the niskav lag v'yasatosh v'chotel chesem mechuber. He's making the case much less mechaven, much less misasik. Right? It's not the pshat that you thought it was shuman, you knew you were eating. No, you didn't even know you were eating. You thought it was a saliva, you didn't chap it was food. In that situation, the parallel to that in Shabbos, you would be potter. Hashem Shabbos, the potter, niskam like be'asatosh, v'chotel chesem mechuber, potter. Why? Because over there you weren't even mechaven to be chaytech b'chlal. Right? Just like by roig, you were mechaven to eat b'chlal. So by Shabbos you would be potter because of misasik. Niskam nachtas satosh, v'chotel mechuber, you're talking going to be chayev. So Abai holds your chayev. Okay.